The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waking humanity, one soul at a time. This is the World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome along to this week's edition of The World You Don't Know. With myself, Mick O'Connell. I do have a guest lined up. I've got a return guest. I've got Ian O'Crane, who's over in the UK, coming on now in a moment. I have him waiting in the wings there on Skype. Ian is an ex-oil field executive. He worked in the oil business many years ago, so we've seen on the inside what was going on within the oil business on a global scale, and he decided to use his conscience, and now he's an ardent campaigner against what oil companies get up to, against what governments get up to, and he's a great truther, is for want of a better word, and he's been on my show a couple of times before, and I had the pleasure of meeting him last year down in Waterford, where he gave a wonderful presentation at the very first Open Minds Island Conference in Dooley's Hotel, and we had a few pints afterwards as well and a good chat in the bar. He's an absolute gentleman, so I'm going to go straight to Ian because we've got lots to talk about. There's an awful lot going on around the world, folks, and Ian has his finger on the pulse on a lot of what's going on, so sit back and enjoy the show. Good evening, Ian.
Hey Mick, how you doing?
I'm not doing too bad, and yourself?
Yeah, not bad.
That's good. That's good. Listen, I was watching a few of your videos today. I watched a fair bit of Humanity versus Insanity, or Insanity versus Humanity. The one you done with that guy from, I think it was Newcastle he was from, was it? About 5G. Very interesting show.
Yes, and I mean 5G is something that everyone should be concerned about. 5G is being rolled out in Ireland.
It is, yeah.
It is in the UK, and I mean, to be honest, it's something that I didn't feel that we had enough hooks to get people motivated to take up the cudgels, as it were, against the 5G rollout. But then a few weeks ago, I got the hook that I needed when an article appeared in the mainstream media about the necessity to cull trees to facilitate the 5G rollout, because 5G works on microwave frequencies, and trees are a major problem for 5G. And I don't know whether people are aware in Ireland, but in the UK, the focus has been on Sheffield in South Yorkshire, where a Spanish company, Amy, has a contract that's reportedly worth something in the region of about €2.5 billion, and that's to cull 17,500 trees from the city of Sheffield, from the streets of the city of Sheffield, and so this gave me the hook and the link that I needed to try to get the already active campaign in Sheffield, which is obviously trying to resist the removal of the trees, and hopefully get them to see that the reason the trees were being removed had nothing to do with disease, had nothing to do with problems with the roots and road maintenance, but it had everything to do with getting them out of the way so that the 5G network can be established in Sheffield. And if the trees are there, then obviously everyone's going to be moaning that they're not getting their Wi-Fi, or not getting a phone signal, and so basically they're taking the initiative and removing all the trees. And whilst the focus is on Sheffield, it's actually going on in towns and cities and communities throughout the UK, because this 5G rollout is scheduled for 2020, and basically it's intended to be pretty much global in 2020. So we only have a couple of years to get people to wake up to the physical issue, which is the necessity to remove trees. And then, of course, there is the health issues associated with the frequencies, the microwave frequencies that are being used for this. And the massive difference is that because of the wavelength, a very short wavelength. It's literally line of sight transmission. And so in the UK, whereas at the moment we have something like about 50,000 phone masts around the country, 5G is going to need at least 10 times that. And in fact, all lampposts are being retrofitted to enable the 5G antenna to be mounted on the top of the lampposts. And obviously what the contractors like Amy are doing is making sure that there is clear line of sight between the transmitter on the top of the lamppost and the receptor, which is obviously the houses and offices along the roads.
Now, one thing I've noticed here in Ireland over the last few years, and we've got 4G here, as you have in the UK and most other developed nations around the world. But one thing I've noticed now, since we've gone from 3G to 4G, and this could be just me, maybe I'm missing the point somewhere, but I've noticed that you don't hear birds singing in the mornings anymore. You know, you don't see as much wildlife in gardens anymore. Whether this has anything to do with these masts that are put up all over the place. I mean, there's even talk that bee populations are getting decimated because of this.
Well, that's absolutely the case. And Mark Steele, who was my guest on last Thursday's episode of Humanity versus Insanity, he talked about a situation where the government departments responsible for this, the Environment Agency, the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and the absurdly named Department of Digital Culture and Sport, I think it is. I mean, it seems a bit of a strange mix. But anyway, they had stated that they had studies which showed that the electromagnetic frequencies had no impact on the bee population. But when he pushed this through Freedom of Information requests, it was actually established that they hadn't got any reports which said anything of the sort. So, you know, we've got a classic situation here, basically, where the government is withholding information to ensure that nothing gets in the way of this rollout. And you know, you're right, it's not just the bee population. But, you know, there are now studies, and in fact, I've linked to I think it's an hour's dissertation or so by Mr. Mutter, I think his name is, and he's a consultant with the California Brain Tumor Association, and, you know, he's making the observation that there is an increase in brain tumors as a result of people using their mobile phones. And it's like all things, you know, different people react in different ways. So some people may not notice any negative effects whatsoever. And of course, the reality is that people don't notice it creeping up on them. I mean, there was an infamous case in Italy where a guy tried to sue the telephone company because he was always on his mobile phone, and he developed a brain tumor. And, you know, he claimed that the mobile phone company should have given him, you know, an appropriate warning. But it turned out, you know, that his profession meant that his phone was pretty much glued to his ear for most of the day. And, of course, that wasn't necessarily how they were designed. But there was indeed no health warning against using the phone in that way. And, of course, the general counsel now is not to hold your phone, you know, right up to your ear. I mean, if at all possible, use hardwired earphones, you know, so that you're actually minimizing the amount of electromagnetic field that is entering the skull. But the reality is that it's always, you know, the vulnerable who suffer the most. And that in particular is young children and pregnant women and, of course, the elderly. Now, you know, currently the elderly are probably the least users of smartphones. Of course, there's nothing smart about them for us. But, you know, the real concern is the children. And the fact that, you know, we are seeing 2-year-olds, you know, being given iPads or something similar, you know, to keep them amused. And, of course, this is exposing them to the EMF from a very, very early age. And a number of studies have linked self-harming amongst teen girls and suicides amongst teen boys, and have linked it to their exposure to electromagnetic fields, whether that's by holding their own phone right up against the side of their head or living in close proximity to a phone mast.
We had a case, something like that here in Dublin a few years back. I remember reading about it in the paper. There was an area in a district in Dublin called Clondalkin, and in this particular area where people were living, there were these high voltage energy lines, electricity lines, not too far from people's houses. But there seemed to be, anywhere where people were living close to these energy lines, or these power lines, there tended to be clusters of people developing similar types of cancer.
Yeah, I think it has been it has been a problem. The power lines have been a problem for some time. I mean, and in the US, there have been a number of studies, because in the US they literally run over the tops of people's houses. And again, it's been linked to leukemia particularly in young people. So what's happening? The bottom line is what's happening is the advancing technology is effectively being rolled out before it is proven to be safe. And the industry and the governments work on the basis of, well, once we get it out there, the reality is that no one's going to say, oh, no, we don't want it. So provided it doesn't affect them, then they will simply they will simply just accept it and basically deal with the consequences. And this is what they rely on. And yet, of course, people actually have this blind faith in government and government agencies that they are there to protect them against the excesses of the corporate sociopaths. But in reality, of course, they're not there to do that at all. They are there to effectively create this facade of protection. But really what they're there to do is to convince the general public that they are there to fulfill that role, when in reality they're simply there to smooth the way for the corporations to be able to roll out whatever it is they basically want to roll out. And, because of the commitment that has been made to 5G, and the reason 5G is so essential for the establishment is because this is their control grid. I mean, this is going to give them the capability and the capacity to implement the Internet of Things. So, it will be the the total control network, the total spy grid.
I mean, I've seen a video.
Let me just say, Mick, that this was actually first mooted. It was first documented as a vision in 1932 by Marion King Hubbard and Howard Scott in their document Technocracy Inc. And what they basically envisioned in 1932 wasn't possible then, because obviously the technology didn't exist. But here we are, less than 100 years later, and basically, what they have is the technocracy, the technocratic control grid, as Zbigniew Brzezinski referred to it in his book, Between Two Ages, which he wrote in 1969, published in 1970. And anyone reading these two documents, and in particular Brzezinski's book, will see that everything he was writing about in nearly 50 years ago is basically coming to pass now and will be in place with the 5G control network.
Now, this 5G control network, I seen a video not so long ago, and it was in relation to China, and I don't know if it was a hoax video or not, you might have seen it, but you can see people walking down the street and this facial recognition software is mapping them.
Yeah.
And basically then the guy who was narrating the video, he was saying that in China, if you're a dissident, they know everything about you. They've got your faces mapped, they've got your ID, they have all the information they need about you. That they're restricted from getting on, buses, on trains, going into certain buildings and stuff like that. If their face doesn't match a database, they won't be allowed in, they won't be allowed on buses. Do you reckon that's what this 5G grid you speak of is all about, that?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, they're going a stage further. I mean, in China, they're experimenting in some places, some cities, with a social rating. So basically, I mean, I think this was actually put out in one of the TV series. I think it was Black Mirror, maybe. But basically, you know, you get a social rating. So basically, it's your Facebook likes that determine your social status. And, you know, if you want to have certain social privileges, then you've got to be a conformist and, you know, go after the Facebook likes. But they've got to be from people who are also regarded as conformists. So, yes, I mean, obviously what this provides is a vehicle for literally, you know, the full spectrum dominance, the total control.
And that's what you've spoken this full spectrum dominance years and years back in when I first discovered your work online. You were talking about this full spectrum dominance, and now you can see it coming into being. You can actually see it, like the physical structure of it. But these masks are everywhere here.
Yeah. Well, the term full spectrum dominance effectively comes from the document published by the Project for a New American Century in September of 2000. And, you know, this is the blueprint. It was called Rebuilding America's Defenses. And pretty much this was actually a sort of rewrite of another Zbigniew Brzezinski book called The Grand Chessboard, which he wrote in 1997. But, you know, this document literally talks about the unipolar world where the US is effectively the only superpower. That was the term Brzezinski used, a superpower. But, you know, that, of course, is almost unraveling as we speak, which is why we're seeing at the moment the UK and US effectively doing everything they can to demonize Russia in the eyes of their population, because what they're really concerned about is Russia effectively becoming a force to be reckoned with, which I would suggest it is anyway. But the arrogance of the global banksters, and of course, you know, the US is their military, the UK is their finance, and Rome is their religion, or Jerusalem if you prefer. But they are concerned that the Russia-China relationship may actually sort of create a, you know, bi or even tripolar axis. But so, you know, what we're seeing is this outrageous and absurd false flag bullshit, like this the poisoning.
The poison. Now, and I want to get into that next then. Listen,
didn't happen.
Listen, I need to go to an ad break, so I want to get into this Skripal case when we come back from the ad. So, folks, we'll be back in 2 minutes with Ian Crane. Ian, you hang on in the wings there for a couple of minutes, and I'll be back to you very shortly. Talk to you in a couple of moments, folks.
Broadcasting to Lucan, this is Liffey Sound, 96.4 FM.
You're listening to Liffey Sound
on 96.4
FM.
Now, folks, you're very welcome back. Just before the break there, we were just about to talk about the Skripal case. But before I do, I just want to give out the text number. It's 087 062 7138. Or you can check out the Facebook page. It's The World You Don't Know on Facebook. Now, Ian, just before the break there, you mentioned the poisoning, the Russian poisoning. I didn't believe it from a moment, but I was waiting on the news for the footage that would convince me that it was a bullshit false flag, and that was a policeman standing outside the Skripals door, the front door, and then a couple of days later, then the media saying that the front door was smeared in this deadly poison, Novichok. And I remember then the policeman standing outside said, "Well, that's a bit strange."
Well, you know, listen, I think we can safely say now, as you know, what is it? A little over a month. It was the 4th of March that it occurred. So it's, 5 weeks or so. And within 5 weeks, the whole thing has unravelled.
They've been made a laughing stock.
Say again?
The British have been made a laughing stock, you know, in my eyes and anybody else with eyes to see.
Oh, no, I mean, you know, if they had any, how should I say, self-awareness, then, you know, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Gavin Williamson, and Jonathan Allen, I mean, all of these people would resign and, you know, they'd fall on their sword and be eating humble pie. And, of course, Boris in particular, because of the crap he's come out with. But, what people need to be aware of is that, and I'm looking at the Royal Navy website right now, and they had pre-posted this. I'm not too sure exactly when it appeared, but this is on their website, and it's talking about, well, the headline is Toxic Storm for Royal Marines in Major Chemical Exercise. And this was an exercise that was scheduled to kick off on the 6th of March, right? And it starts off, Royal Marines don gas masks for 3 weeks as they tested Britain's ability to fight in the event of a chemical or worse, nuclear attack. Troops from 40 Commando based at Norton Manor near Taunton, which is not that far from Salisbury, joined the country's leading experts in chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear warfare to make sure they could cope in a worst-case scenario. So the only thing missing here, for those people who are aware of what occurred on the London bombings in July of 2005, the only thing missing was Peter Power coming out of the wings and claiming that, he was running an exercise which went live. And here we've got prima facie evidence that there was an exercise running.
Yeah.
And of course, this is the standard template for all false flags. There is always an exercise.
That's the one thing I always look out for.
Or immediately prior to the event.
So what do you think? I mean, to me, I'm looking at the media. It seems like there's a bit of a climb down now from the British. They're no longer like, we want to go to war with the Russians because the Russians tried to poison Mr. Skripal in our country and all that bullshit. Nobody's buying it.
No, I don't. I mean, but frankly, I think the only people buying it in this country anyway were, those who are still reliant on their information from the mainstream media, which is, of course, a reducing population on a daily basis. So, I mean, even randomly in the streets, when you heard people talking about it, I didn't hear anybody basically buy into the official version of events. Now, I don't profess to know precisely what did happen, but I think, we knew from the outset what didn't happen, and it was just a question of sitting back and waiting for it all to fall apart. And, of course, the speed with which it's fallen apart is something to behold. And, and what it does is it shows the absurd caliber of people that we have in British politics. And, I mean, basically, this is the same, almost everywhere in the world, of course, sadly, because at some point, all politicians effectively prostitute themselves to the either the party whip, which in turn is prostituted to the corporations, and the politician that is prepared to stand up and be counted is certainly a rare individual. And one has to say, that Jeremy Corbyn, right from the outset, was asking all the right questions.
Where's the evidence?
Asking for the evidence to be produced.
Yeah. And they called him an anti-Semite for that. That's a great way of attacking him.
What happens when you get close to the truth?
They call you an anti-Semite.
They play the anti-Semite card.
And the Holocaust denier
card. I mean, I'm sure many of your listeners have seen the footage of Shalamot Aloni, and this goes back some years when she was interviewed on Democracy Now!, where she made the observation. She said it's very easy to deal with anyone who questions, the agenda of Israel. She says in the US we call them an anti-Semite, and in Europe we simply call them a Holocaust denier. Well, this is a tactic that some people will still fall for, but what it's doing is it's actually helping people, I think, to learn or relearn the skills of discretion and discernment. And so, the mainstream media pumps out a narrative which it thinks people are falling for, but actually what it's doing is it's actually waking people up, because, the more outrageous their lies and their deceit, then obviously the less the confidence in the establishment.
Yeah.
And people are literally, unfortunately, they're too busy doing other stuff like earning money to get as involved as they should get, because the sad thing is that all this has sort of fallen apart, but most people, they're on the train and they're just going, what a crock, but not actually taking too much more interest. And that's the sad factor.
Yes, you don't really know what's going on. Like, I'll give you a prime example of that here on Saturday in Dublin. There was an anti-homeless march here in Dublin. People were out marching in solidarity with the homeless. But one of the big political parties that did attend the march was the Labour Party here in Ireland. The very same party who signed the eviction bill into law.
Yeah.
This will tell you how stupid people are.
Yeah.
That they will get out and march with these people, even after they caused the homeless crisis in Dublin that they're out marching against.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, there's 10,000 people homeless in this country now. 10,000 in.
Well,
it's nuts.
I wouldn't like to think what number it is in the UK.
Oh, I can only imagine what it is there.
It's got to be 10 times that.
Oh, without a doubt.
And I completely understand it. To all intents and purposes, some people might consider me to be homeless. I don't consider me to be homeless. I just consider me to be houseless. So I have a roof over my head, and I'm very comfortable in my caravan. But I decided that I didn't want to have the costs associated with being in a permanent dwelling. The council tax, utilities. I wanted to spend what little money I have actually helping or trying to help people become aware of the assault that is being unleashed upon them and their families. And, the concern for me is that, I'm in my early 60s. And, the concern for me is that our generation has really fucked it up for the next few generations.
Oh, without a doubt.
Maybe, in worst case scenario, maybe forever. Because if we don't get a fundamental change in direction, then where we are heading is literally into a transhumanist nightmare where people who are not making a direct contribution to the corporatocracy will be considered to be surplus. And, one of the observations that Brzezinski makes in his book Between Two Ages, which he wrote in 1969, and in that he says that in the future, basically people will be governed by a technocratic elite who will not subscribe to traditional liberal values. And what he's really saying there is basically they'll do whatever it is they want to do because they can do it and there won't be any resistance.
Nobody will be able to stop them.
And so what I sadly predict, unless people start to wake up to the magnitude of the assault, then certainly, hopefully not in my lifetime, but, certainly within the next 30 to 40 years, what we are going to see is a situation where anybody that is not making a direct contribution to the corporatocracy, i.e. on a payroll, they will effectively be considered to be surplus to any useful life and, will probably be euthanized.
That's scary. There's a company operating here in Ireland. I don't know if you've heard of them now, called CTEC.
Yeah.
And I think they're a part of G4S. I'm not sure, but they are now running the employment services here on behalf of the government.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is, it's a bit like in England. Did you ever see that movie I, Daniel Blake?
Of course.
Well, it's getting like that here now. But
I, Daniel Blake didn't even get close. And the problem with I, Daniel Blake is that a lot of people in the north of England, in particular, made the observation that it didn't even get close to the magnitude of the oppression that these Atos and Maximus employees put people under. Whereas people in the south, their attitude was, well, oh my God, unless I keep my nose to the grindstone and work every hour God send, and whilst holding down 6 jobs to actually make ends meet, that could be me. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is people still, committing suicide or dying because they're being told that they're fit for work when the medical profession says they're not. But these employees of these private companies who are incentivized to reduce the amount of benefits paid are effectively sentencing these people to death.
Yeah, I know people here now who've been hounded into dead-end jobs where the money is terrible and they've got no choice but to take it,
Well, this is the
or
problem.
they'd be cut out of the
Well,
system.
Universal credit, or and which is another name for universal income. Universal credit is like a first stage of universal income, and the bottom line is, once you're on universal credit, then basically you are owned by the state. The likelihood of getting off of it is slim to none. And if the state tells you that you are expected to go work in a warehouse for 40 hours a week or more for nothing, on the basis that there might be a job at the end of it, then you have to go do it. Otherwise, your benefits are sanctioned.
Yeah.
And the problem is, of course, what these unscrupulous employers are doing is literally milking the system by taking somebody for the sort of 6 weeks they get for free, and then basically it's like, next.
Yeah.
You know, so they spit that one out because they would have to pay them now or take them on the payroll, and they'll take the next person for free. And, you know, what we're seeing as well is we're seeing employers lose any sort of social responsibility. You know, I mean, even in places like Devon, you know, what we're seeing now is small independent companies, and certainly a lot of the shops, they're literally employing people on 0 hours contracts or 8 hour contracts. And what they're doing is not only keeping them on absolute minimum hours, but then what they're doing is they're prioritizing 16, 17, 18-year-olds or apprentices, because they can pay them £3.70 an hour as opposed to a minimum wage of £7.80 something. And you know, what they are doing is they are knowingly forcing people on their payroll into poverty.
Yeah, it's disgusting. It really is disgusting.
It is. You know, once upon a time, an employer took pride in the contribution that they made to the community in which they operated. Today, the attitude is literally that they are a human resource. I mean, they're telling people in their jargon what they are. They are a human resource to be used, abused, and discarded at whim, without a care for the impact that it has on the individual's life or their families.
Yeah. It's wrong, and as you said yourself earlier on, and people are committing suicide because of this crap.
Yeah, but, you know, now let's come to the fact, why is this happening? Why is it happening? Because we, the collective we, let it happen. You know, and this is what is so sad, is that, you know, within the West, basically we, the collective we, have become so dumbed down. We've become so apathetic that basically the establishment can get away with these outrages, and everyone listening is going to go, yeah, it's terrible, it's terrible. But, you know, with all due respect, ask yourselves the question, what are we, the collective we, doing about it? Because, you know, this isn't about relying on NGOs, not non-government organizations, you know, to get involved and take care of this for us. You know, unless people actually become involved, unless community activism, you know, returns into the political arena. And, you know, it has to some extent in the UK. We've seen that with fracking. But, you know, it's not enough. We've got to extend it into other areas.
Yeah.
Unless we get involved, then unfortunately the prognosis is pretty ugly.
They're rolling out this bloody 5G thing now. As you said, that they're getting ready to roll it out in 2020. And there's something else I wanted to ask you about that. In relation to people's behaviour. I was reading there a while ago online that this 5G and even 4G is causing violence amongst, you know, young people, that they're becoming more and more violent, they're becoming more readily willing to commit acts of violence. And it reminded me then of what went on in London over the last few days, the spate of stabbings going on in London at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I can't make any link between anything of that, you know, but on a generic basis, as I said earlier, you know, there is evidence to suggest that you know, the presence of EMF, high levels of EMF, has caused self-harming in young women and suicides in young men. And of course, it's a decade ago now, a little over, I think, since we had the spate of suicides in Bridgend in South Wales.
Yeah.
You know, and there was literally a media blackout on that. And there was no formal investigation into why there was this spate of suicides, all by hanging, all bar one by hanging. So, and
over what period of time did that take place?
I think it was about 14 months.
And how many was there?
I think it was 26.
And that's just in Bridgend alone, which is probably not that big of a place, is it?
Yeah, it's not a big place,
right.
No. And I mean, the media just went into total shutdown of it. There was barely a mention, and certainly, as I say, no studies as to why Bridgend experienced this glitch. Well, there were two independent studies, one by a medical professional who was able to ascertain that all the people who committed suicide, all the young people, were either on or had recently been on a course of Ritalin. And Ritalin is an extremely pernicious pharmaceutical that has an interesting chemical structure.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's used to treat ADHD.
Yeah, my sister's son was on it years and years ago, and as I witnessed it myself, the time he was on it, he was like a zombie, and when he come off it then, he just literally went off the head for ages.
Yeah, and I mean, it really does impact on the behaviour. Yeah. And what's interesting about this drug is it works very differently in the developing brain than it does in the developed brain. And in fact, there's a professor at Manchester University, Professor John Harris, and every year he gets a couple of articles into the mainstream media promoting the idea that Ritalin should be freely available over the counter of all colleges and universities because it aids concentration. So, this is a classic indication that the drug has two very, very different effects.
Depending on the developed brain.
One on the developing brain, which turns them into zombies, and one on the developed brain, which enhances concentration.
Bit like speed or cocaine or something like that.
Exactly. In fact, it's
the opposite
similar
effect. Yeah.
So that was one of the observations about the situation in Bridgend, and the other one was conducted by somebody, Barry Trower, who is a former government scientist with a specialist knowledge in electromagnetic fields, and he made the observation that each of the suicides lived, I think it was within 80 meters of a phone mast.
And that's no coincidence.
And so maybe it's a combination of the two.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is there was no formal studies. So call it a hunch. I would say the establishment had a pretty damn good idea of what was causing this problem, and maybe Bridgend was an experiment. Maybe they were seeing how high they could turn up the power on these phone masts. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, if human beings vibrate at a particular frequency, we've got these bloody phone masts everywhere, bouncing frequencies all over the place. It has to have some sort of an effect, whether that be negative or positive on anything that it touches.
And certainly with 5G, which is microwave frequency.
And they haven't switched that on yet, have they?
No, absolutely. Only in a few experimental locations. But
it'll be interesting to see what happens when they do.
Look at what these frequencies do to water. I mean, one of the reasons they have to remove the trees is because the trees themselves are a problem. But during the summer, the spring and the summer, when the trees have foliage, that increases the problem.
Yeah.
And if it rains, and the water is sitting on the leaves, then basically it effectively makes the tree impenetrable. And
people will accept the culling of those trees for the convenience.
And it messes up with the molecular structure of the water. Now, human beings are, 70% water or something?
Something like that, yeah.
So inevitably, these microwave frequencies are going to have an effect. And whilst I'm not for one moment suggesting that one day the technology might be developed in such a way that it's not harmful to all life, but right now it will be.
It shouldn't be switched on unless they know it's not going to cause anybody any harm.
Exactly. It shouldn't be switched on. But what we've got all around the world is government departments and their respective advisory bodies restricting the availability of information. And in some cases, the information may literally be being withheld from government departments, by the industry and by the academics working with the industry.
But so the industry's not going to...
If they roll it out too quickly, then, if this information does become known to the government ministers, then they wouldn't have any choice except to delay the implementation.
Yeah, and they know this. Ian, I need to go to one more break, so do you mind hanging on for a couple of minutes?
Sure, no worries.
That'll be brilliant. Folks, we'll be back in 2 minutes with Ian O'Krane. Talk to you very shortly.
Local programs, local presenters, local news. Tune to Liffey Sound 96.4 FM.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome back. The text number is 087 062 7138. That's 087 062 7138. Ian, I've got about 10 minutes left. In relation to this 5G, what will the difference be to the consumer? Because as you said yourself earlier on, it's going to be easy for them to sell this to the consumers. They're not going to see what we see with 5G. They're going to see the convenience of it.
That you'll be able to download movies, without them keep having to stop to cache the download. They'll be claiming that you can access your Facebook page a few nanoseconds faster, and that may be the case. But in reality, it's to give them the spectrum to be able to introduce the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is where literally every single item will have an IP address and can be tracked and monitored, i.e. monitored in terms of its location, monitored in terms of its usage.
So they'll know what you're using, where you're using it, how you're using it, how much you spent on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also it will, because of the nature of the frequencies, it will literally be able to provide a radio frequency image of who is where in a particular building. So, it is effectively a military technology that is now being rolled out for civilian use. But in reality, what it's doing is it's effectively rolling out the capability for, total control. You don't need martial control, you just do it electronically.
And you wouldn't even need policemen on the street. If they wanted to keep you penned in, like I was saying about the video I was saying over in China, all you have to do is bar you from public transport. So if they've got facial recognition technology, the bus door simply won't open for you.
Yeah, exactly. And where they're going with this is also tracking all vehicle movements, and ultimately taxing people per mile travel.
Yeah. But they brought legislation out here now in Ireland, and I'm sure they're going to do it in the UK. They probably already have. I think from 2020, if I'm not mistaken, all cars imported into Ireland have to have an SOS system built into the car, which means if your car crashes, it automatically dials for help.
Yeah.
So you're being tracked everywhere you go.
Exactly. And by the way, once they start taxing people on a per mile basis, eventually it'll be done on a real-time basis, and if you haven't got the money in your account, your car won't move. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and if people think this is all just airy-fairy pie in the sky stuff, think of your wheelie bin. If you don't pay your bin company, your bin just will not get lifted by that truck. It won't move.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what this is. It's total control. The bin companies have control over your rubbish collection. If you don't pay them, the rubbish builds up in your house.
Yeah. So, listen, Mick, of course it sounds like rampant conspiracy. It's meant to. Because that's how the establishment also keep the population in blissful ignorance. By presenting any suggestion that anything like this will be occurring, it's just a rampant conspiracy. Which is why it's so important for us to emphasize that, we're not asking anyone to take our word for it. The information is out there. It's freely available. You're never, ever going to hear the establishment say, look, don't take our word for it that it's safe. Don't take our word for it that it's benign, that it's not going to have any negative health impacts. Do your own research. They daren't say that because they know that when people do start looking at it,
they start finding things out.
They realise that this is being rolled out with the establishment knowing fine well that it's not properly tested and it's not safe.
Now, you talk about the safety aspects of this, Ian, right? And that is one of my big concerns as well, as I'm sure is anybody's concerns who becomes aware of this. The powers that be, the government, these corporations and stuff like that, it's going to affect them as well, isn't it? Or do they have some sort of an immunity to this?
No, it is going to affect everybody. What we're seeing in the UK now is this push towards recognition of dementia, and they know fine well that exposure to 5G is going to increase the incidences of dementia. And I think that, look, they know they're going to need less and less employees. The automation, autonomous vehicles, truck drivers will be history within 20 years.
It's getting that way already. Yeah, there are autonomous trucks out there.
Yeah, exactly. Cab drivers. Well, we've seen the results of that in the States recently, where the Tesla crashed. But okay, these are the what they'll put down to just the
teething problems.
Yeah, teething troubles, exactly. But let's be generous. Within 30 years, if we look where we've come from in the last 30 years, I mean, it is, what is it now? It's 34 years since I first had a computer on my desk at work. So I was 28 before I had a computer. And I was, how old was I? I was 31 before I had a mobile phone. And that was, one of the first mobile phones
a brick
to be used in this country. And there wasn't much of a network. It only really operated around the main artery roads and, on the mainline railway tracks. But when you consider that, so that's in the space of just over 30 years, from not having a computer to having a computer, and from there not even being anything like mobile phones, to having an embryonic network. And you look where we are today in 30 years. Now, technology is advancing exponentially. Very, very fast. So, you extrapolate that, and, the youngsters who are in their, let's say they're under 18 today.
They take all this for granted.
They're taking what we have for granted, and they will take the continued growth and advancing technology for granted. But at what point will there be a reaction because they're realizing that it's effectively killing them?
Yeah. I wonder, don't get me wrong, Eamon, I was 18 and 19 in the late 1980s, early 90s, and I seen all this technology coming down the line, like most other people. It was exciting. You're looking at this, this is going to be great. Mobile phones and this and that and this and that. It's only now that I'm in my mid to late 40s that now I can see that this may be having a negative effect on humanity. But unfortunately, as you said, the millennial generation, the 18 to 20-year-olds now, it's just all about convenience for them.
Absolutely.
And they don't see the dangers of any of this.
No, they don't.
And that's not just the physical health dangers. I'm talking about the dangers to their freedom.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that we are literally heading in to a transhumanist nightmare. Because when you look at the likes of Google and Apple, and you look at their agenda for integrating man with technology, by 2050, I mean, Ray Kurzweil, who's the who was 30 years ago was just regarded as an eccentric visionary, but now he's director of engineering with Google, so he has access to unlimited funding, and he makes no secret of the fact that his ultimate goal is to literally be able to download consciousness into the mainframe. And he's even gone so far as to say, at which point we don't need the physical body. So, basically you download the consciousness into the mainframe and then just sort of kill off the physical vehicle, because it's a drain on resources and it's no longer contributing anything.
Yeah.
And if you think that's science fiction, well, I'm pretty glad that I won't be around in 2050, or if I am, I won't know much about it. But the rate at which some of these eccentrics who do not have humanity's best interests at heart, they have a very selfish agenda, and they are not able to look at the bigger picture and look to use technology for the greater good of humanity. They're only interested in using it either for their own personal gain or for their own personal agenda. And Ray Kurzweil's agenda is to be able to bring his dead father back to life.
Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've just got a text in there. It was just in relation to something we said from a listener called Paul. He was asking, how do the elite protect themselves from such frequencies of microwave radiation? He always wondered that side of it. But I mean, that's something we just said. Maybe they have no protection.
Maybe they don't. But on the other hand, I would suggest that those people who have access to unlimited resources, i.e. finances, will turn their houses into Faraday cages and will hardwire everything.
Yeah.
I mean, bear in mind, look, the French are on the case. The French have, a few years ago, they made it illegal for Wi-Fi to be in any public building that is used for education of anybody under the age of 6. And there are moves to try and increase the age at which Wi-Fi is banned. So, you know, the French are on the case. But, you know, everywhere else, no, we don't want to talk about it. So, you know, maybe those who do know, say they convert their houses to Faraday cages, they hardwire everything rather than using Wi-Fi
and stuff, yeah.
So that they're only exposed to it, you know, when they're outside, because, you know, they can put a Faraday cage in their cars, put a Faraday cage in their office, in their home, and so they can minimize their exposure. And it's just the proletariat that are bombarded with this crap, and so they're the ones who will suffer the most.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I've got about 2 minutes left. One big question, I suppose, for you, with all this stuff going on with Russia and the British getting caught out fairly quickly, in my opinion. The to and fro with Syria, the Kim Jong-un sort of saying, listen, I'll go over to America and have a little yap with Donald Trump. Is the global power structure falling apart, and are they all vying for position? What do you think is really going on?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and there's no question the global banksters are gagging for a massive war. And if it means that takes the world into conflict, then they're more than happy to deal with the consequences.
Well, they've done it before and they'll do it again.
Obviously have everybody borrowing from them to finance it. Or meanwhile, if in the short term it's contained as a proxy war in Syria, I mean, obviously there's a desperation to remove Assad from Syria. I mean, they've been trying to do it for 5 years. It's almost exactly 5 years since Cameron tried to blame Assad for using chemical weapons on his own population, which there was no proof of, and I think I can categorically state he would never sanction.
No, I don't think he'd. I mean, why would he? I mean, he'd have the whole bloody... Donald Trump is already threatening that within 48 hours he's going to unleash God knows what on Syria because of this alleged chemical attack. And you have to ask yourself, why would Assad launch an attack like that when he knows what the consequences are going to be?
There's no possible way that Assad would launch the chemical attack any more today than he would have done 5 years ago.
It's ridiculous.
You know, one of the speakers at my forthcoming AB9 conference, which is a little over 3 weeks away now, is Dilyana Gatansheva, and she's the Bulgarian journalist who exposed the arms trade of British, US, and Israeli arms to ISIS via the former Soviet satellite states, and now she's just published another great article exposing the Pentagon's bioweapons program, again focusing on the facilities that the US has retained, and it was supposed to shut down in the former Soviet satellite countries, so the likes of Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, etc. So, you know, at AB9 we will be talking about the detail of the unfolding geopolitical agenda, and also obviously we'll be talking about, you know, what it is that we can do in making sure that communities get involved, because let's bear in mind that the reason that Cameron did not get the authority from Parliament to bomb Syria in 2013 because people from all over the country contacted their MP and basically said, look, this will be a war crime, and you, if you vote for this, will be guilty of a war crime, because there is no evidence, no hard evidence to link this chemical attack to Assad.
Same with Russia.
If Trump unleashes any military assault on Assad on the basis of this allegation, then Trump himself will be committing a war crime.
Yeah. Ian, unfortunately I've come to the end of the show. It's been an absolute blast having you on, and an absolute pleasure having you on again, Ian. You're a great wealth of information.
Thanks, Mick. Always a pleasure.
And listen, you take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you again very soon.
All the best, my friend.
Thanks very much. Talk to you again soon. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that was Ian O'Crane over in the UK. He's an activist. You can check out his website, ianorcrane.com. You'll see him on Facebook. He live streams once a week from the I'm not sure where it is now. I think it's Surrey, I think it might be, where there's a lot of fracking going on, which is drilling down for shale gas, and he's been trying to put a stop to that, I suppose. You know, he's campaigning against that, and fair play to him. He's a great talker, and he's a great researcher, and he's someone that I've admired for quite a long time. Anyway, folks, this is the end of the show. I want to say thanks to one of my listeners, Paul. I'm not sure of his second name, and we sent me in a message. Thanks for sending the message. And my nephew over in Birmingham as well, Dean, I know he's listening in. He sent the message, but I'm not going to read it out because I don't want to drop him in it. Know what I'm saying? Dean. Anyway, this is the end of the show. So until next week, folks, remember, the world is full of great people. If you can't find one, be one. Talk to you next week.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waking humanity, one soul at a time. This is the World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.